During these high holy days, we've been exploring the many roles that the shofar plays in Jewish tradition. This morning, we will look at the shofar as a tool to announce a significant transition. We know that the Torah tells us to mark the new year with the sound of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. In biblical times, a new month was also heralded with the shofar's blast. In addition, in Leviticus, we read that every 50 years, the shofar was to proclaim a yovel, a jubilee, proclaim a yovel throughout the land to all of its inhabitants. This was a visionary call for the manumission of slaves, the canceling of debts, the return of property to its original owners, and a year of rest for the land. The shofar is Judaism's unique way of marking time, encouraging us to pause for reflection before moving forward. This Yom Kippur, we can use the shofar's final tekiah at the end of the day as a plea to be thoughtful and proactive about the communal transition that we will be making in the coming year. As we hear the shofar, each one of us must think about our personal role in advancing and enhancing the legacy of this congregation for decades into the future. It is a sacred responsibility. I chose this morning to speak about what my coming retirement might mean to this community because the Yom Kippur morning Torah text contains the words of Moses as he prepares to leave the wilderness community. That may seem a bit grandiose to state that there are some parallels between the Moses and ancient Israelite transition moment and this situation for us in the coming year, but indulge me for a moment. Moses and I both served our communities for 4 decades. Moses will have 1 year up on me, and I'm okay with that. However, there is one important distinction. Let's recall that Moses did not choose to retire. He was forced out by none other than God because of his lack of faith when he struck the rock instead of speaking to it to get water from it. And it was Moses' death that marked the end of his tenure. And I'm really not looking to mirror Moses and his departure quite that closely. Moses knew well in advance that he would not lead his people into the land. Therefore, he was able to elevate Joshua as his successor. That transfer of leadership worked out well. But by and large, contemporary Jewish communities have not done well with that hand-picked by your predecessor approach. So our temple lay leaders have researched and opted to follow best practices for a successful rabbinic transition here at Beth Hillel, to interview and hire a transitional interim rabbi for 1 year, and then a new settled rabbi the following year. And frankly, I'm relieved that I will not be channeling Moses and choosing a Joshua for you, and I have total confidence that our lay leaders will choose well. Moses made other admirable decisions as he prepared to leave, and his actions can serve as a model to emulate in helping any community through a leadership transition. Perhaps the most important thing that Moses did was to speak about legacy. He exhorted the Israelites to accept their role as a link in the Shalshelet HaKabbalah, the chain of tradition, and to make a commitment to pass it on to those who would come after them. We hear this so clearly in the words that were chanted so beautifully from our Torah portion this morning. Moses knew that the people were worried. They were not sure that they had a way forward without him. His message to them was, you can do this. That which I command you this day, lo nifleti, velo lehokahi, it's not too baffling for you, nor too far away. Lo bashamayim hi, it's not up in the heavens, so that you have to say, who will go up and take it for us? Nor is it across the seas, so that someone has to make a voyage and get it for you. No, says Moses, it's very near to you. In fact, it's beficha, in your mouth, uvilavavacha, and in your heart, and you will be the ones to do it. And so, following Moses' lead, that is precisely what I wish to emphasize this morning and in the coming months as well. The legacy of this congregation is ours. It's all of ours. You and I, we inherited this congregation from generations of members before us. It now belongs to us, and it's in our hands to pass it on, l'dor vador, to the next generation. Let's pause for a moment to recall those who came before us and the roles they played in providing a Jewish home for us in Kenosha and the surrounding communities, so that when we arrived, it was all here for us. L'dor vador, from generation to generation, our forebears created, nurtured, and grew this community. There were the founders in the 1920s, some of them with names we still know today, like Lepp and Plaus. Mainly local businessmen, who had a vision, a Jewish community center, which included a synagogue with a modern type of worship, along with a young men's Hebrew association, a place to play basketball, to have a Boy Scout troop, space where Jewish organizations could meet, and club rooms where they could socialize. There were the children of that generation, like former Temple President Manfred Baer of blessed memory, who as a boy was asked by the rabbi to go have a Hebrew lesson on an empty lot on a cold November day, so that the city would recognize this location as a property intended for religious use and not have to pay taxes. Or like Frederick Plaus of blessed memory, another former president who at age 16 had a summer job working on the construction crew of this building. Then in the early 1930s, during the Depression, there were the 8 community leaders who signed personal notes to save the congregation from financial ruin. Think about the commitment it took to do that. And in 1956, after a massive remodel that created the school wing and Founders Hall out of what had been a gymnasium, pledges were needed again for the mortgage. And those leaders pledged and then celebrated the burning of the mortgage when Beth Hillel owned this place free and clear just a few years later. And we won't forget the women of Beth Hillel, who raised the funds to furnish the building after it was built, who brought out the silver service that we still have languishing in a closet, using it to serve punch and pour tea at Friday night eggs. They raised the money, they acquired the curriculum, and they became the teachers for the religious school. They started the programming that we now call adult education. And when the sisterhood finally folded in the late 70s or early 80s due to women entering the workforce, they turned over their treasury to sustain the temple. Think about incredible donors like Hy and Dorothy Scheinbrud, blessed memory, who left the majority of their estate to the temple to create the endowment fund 24 years ago, and others who added significant amounts to it. Our annual budget relies heavily on payments from the endowment fund, and it has helped us out in financial crises many times. It's still open for contributions. And let's not underestimate the part played by the organists, the soloists, and the volunteer and paid choir who led the music at services for decades. Think about the congregants who cherished the old little Union prayer book and sang the hymns in English, but who learned to accept new prayer books and more Hebrew over the years. They listened to the kids who came back from camp and youth group with their guitars in the 60s and 70s, and they learned to love Debbie Friedman and Jeff Klepper right along with the younger set. There were 14 rabbis who preceded me, 42 past presidents of the congregation, okay, 44 if you count the two who served twice, who are sitting here this morning, dozens of youth advisors, decades and decades of committee members and volunteers who made it possible for us, when we got here, to just open the door, walk in, and enjoy this wonderful place of Jewish learning, worship, and community. There were, and still are, teens who became leaders themselves, teaching by example that after your bar mitzvah or confirmation, you should continue on in youth leadership and as a helper in our school. Everything was established for us when we arrived. And it's now up to us to step up and set Beth Hillel on a course for success to pass on to those who follow us. And I say us because I will join you in this endeavor throughout this year and in future years after a hiatus to let you find your way with new leadership. But my message today is for you to consider seriously what role you will play in this transition. There are folks here who are saying to themselves, oh, that's for somebody else. I've done my part. There are others who are passive members, letting others do the work of building and maintaining what is here, and just show up to enjoy the fruits of others' labors. Maybe someone else here this morning is a reliable donor but rarely sets foot in the building, or joins in the activities but does not feel the need to stretch a bit to make a stronger financial commitment. Many of our members allow the silver sneaker generation to populate the committees and most of the programming here, and that is not a prescription for future success. New and younger volunteers must step up, and former volunteers need to re-enlist. Consider this. When you've had a need for what Judaism has to offer, be it a life cycle event, a Yom Kippur service, or schooling for your child, everything was available for you right here in this small congregation. But are we making the effort or even the sacrifice that past generations made to ensure that those services will still be available for future generations? In Moses' words, it is in your mouth and in your heart, and you must do it. The decision to serve almost my entire career in a small Jewish community was a purposeful choice for me. Because of my upbringing in Janesville, Wisconsin, I knew that it was possible to build a strong Jewish identity and live a rich and authentic Jewish life in a place like Kenosha. Many who come here from larger Jewish communities and bigger congregations think that a place like this is a Jewish wasteland. But once in our midst, they learn otherwise. There are two doors into Jewish life. The door that leads to an institution where all the amenities are there and a full staff takes care of all your needs. And the other door is the small Jewish community, which places more of a burden on its members to volunteer, but it's a place where you know for sure that you are needed. Both models are worthy of someone who wants to live a full Jewish life, but the latter requires a greater obligation. Small Jewish communities like ours are often bolstered by generous legacy families, some of whom have even long left the community, but they maintain a familial and sacred responsibility to keep it going, and they instill this commitment in their own children as well. Our congregation has benefited from this type of generational commitment even within the last couple of years. The new Bima furniture, the newest memorial tablet out in the hallway, and many of the large gifts to the Accessibility Project were from legacy families. We need to continue to reach out to those families and encourage those still in our midst and appeal to them to make a generations-long investment in Beth Hillel. This afternoon, you'll have an opportunity to join with other members of all ages and stations in life to discuss what it means to be the inheritors of this community we know as Beth Hillel, to be in the storied position of being the guardians of its legacy and responsible for its continuance. Whether you join in that conversation today or not, the coming months will be crucial in establishing this generation's place in that Shalshelet HaKabbalah, the chain of tradition. Today at sunset, the shofar will call us to a communal transition. We are standing in our own Mount Nebo as the community stood with Moses in Deuteronomy, knowing that we are the ones that must carry our community into the future. I call upon us to hear Moses' words from this morning's Torah portion resonating in that final blast. Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem. All of you standing here today, it's in your mouth, beficha, and in your heart, uvilavavacha. It's up to us to pass it on from generation to generation, ledor vador.